Yo guys, I'm Yellow, the Norwegian hardcore PC gamer, and what we are going to do today is going to be two big things, okay? I'm going to teach you guys about frame time and frame rate and the correlation between the two and how many frames you really want to get when you're going to play any competitive game. And further into this video, I will go through a lot about Ryzen, how it truly performs, upsides, downsides, and all those sorts of things. So this video is essentially going to be a lot of information that you most likely will not easily be able to find anywhere. And especially if this is not something you're too interested in, or maybe you're not thinking too much about it. However, in the world of CSGO, if you want to play the game at the absolute outmost highest level, you want to get a really good condition that you're playing in. And this is why many professionals, they will every now and then write stuff on Twitter or Reddit or whatever about bad performance on LAN. It's because of what you can see right here. If you are getting too much of a delay, professional players that play CSGO on great equipment every single day, they're going to notice a very big difference between when they are playing in a good environment and a bad one. And that is aside from the matter of fact that there's going to be a lot of downsides to play with a bad environment, and that could be everything from you having random delay because your frame rate is random, in which the output of you as a physical player playing the game, or a physical human playing the game, you're going to be blocked by the actual machine you're playing on. And that is why if you're going to play the game at, for example, LEM or Supreme or Global, or maybe you're aspiring to get that far, you really want to have a good condition so that you can practice properly like an athlete in the real world per se. Now, you'll never be able to get into a perfect environment. In reality, we have no ping, no delay, and we're watching reality at an infinite frame rate. That is basically the best conditions you could ever get into. Not the case with CSGO and with games, however, but if we compromise, we can still get an environment that is really good. And that is basically where this dude, on this very old site, the information is still set in stone, though, because it's fucking algorithmic, basically. But yeah, the information you're presented with right here is a good indication that when you're sitting with 900 FPS, you literally have too much frames. Your monitor is not going to be able to showcase that many frames, and even if you get a really good one, you're just wasting performance slash future-proofing hardcore. So do whatever you want, but remember that from a certain perspective, it's literally too much, and you are not going to get the worth for what you're paying. Now, at 450 FPS, suddenly it makes more sense, because it's twice as reasonable and simple and easy to hit, and the performance hit is basically nothing. You add 1 millisecond. 1 millisecond is 1,000 of a second. That's literally nothing. In which to 300 FPS, that's even more reasonable to hit, and my PC, depending on the map I play, can just barely hit it after doing a fuck ton of tweaking. So my machine is basically running on steroids, which is not healthy, so it will most likely die unless I upgrade, but that's a different case, okay? A different case for a different time. What I'm trying to say, though, is that there is a lot of new hardware out there. AMD is releasing a lot of CPUs and whatnot, and I know that NVIDIA is releasing new GPUs, and AMD is going to release more stuff as well. So basically what I'm telling you is that you most likely want to upgrade to a reasonably high level in order to not just future-proof yourself, but to get plenty of frames in CSGO if you are interested in competitive games. And especially with Ryzen, it actually have a lot of potential. There are two reasons for this. Number one, it have 16 threads and 8 cores in two clusters, so it's cut in half basically, but it's very good despite that, in which games will eventually be scaled towards that sort of performance level, with the developers actually being interested in it. So in the longer run, there's a lot of good stuff out there that is just waiting to be picked up and utilized for competitive games. And the best part is that it's easier to maintain and to hit a frame rate that isn't insanely high, but is high if you are choosing a multi-core part. And we've seen this in the longer run, but I'm going to get to that later in this video. For now, I think we should focus more on the actual frame rate, and I think that we should literally get into an example right here. I'm just going to do a double check. Yeah, you guys can see this. This is a dude that was doing a little bit of a CS test, and here he's showing his Ryzen 1700 CPU. Now this CPU is not the best one you can get currently from AMD. You can get the 1800X, and he's running the game at a fairly low setting that's because his GPU is not that good, but he's testing to see how well he can get the frame rate to work with his system. Keep in mind that this is the worst new AMD CPU, and he's running the game at an absolutely silly graphical settings. However, I still notice that he he's only running a 1060 graphics card, and that is not that good, but it's not that bad either, really. And he's playing on one of the more taxing maps. Now, from the bat, we can see here that his Ryzen CPU on Windows 7 is running better than on Windows 10, and this is one of the bugs I also wanted to demonstrate with this little video here. Here, we can clearly see that there's an actual CPU utilization that is, in general, a little bit better with the GPU and CPU on good old-fashioned Windows 7. 64-bit, I will presume, upgraded all the way to the brink. If I am going to be reasonable with this random gentleman, I really enjoy that he did, in fact, make this video, because you can see here that the results are different. And this is just from going from Windows 10 to Windows 7. That's kind of like a weird thing. We go back in time and we see more performance. However, I would also claim that there is some sort of performance issue here that is incredibly damaging regarding him playing the game and getting the most out of his system. For example, it's always better to play this game in complete full screen. It's always going to be better to not use hyperthreading, we learned, thanks to the CS community, and 3Click Philip actually redistributed that sort of information even more, I guess is fair to say. And that is aside from his actual preset settings regarding how many threads he's using and all that sort of stuff. Now, he is actually, let's see here, his core speed actually looks pretty abysmal on both the CPUs as well. I'm not sure if I should take that straight to the bank, but if he's only running this CPU at, yeah, like, I think that is 3200 megahertz. That means that he's actually being left out on a ton of performance that he literally would get if he, for example, tuned his CPU even better. Because this CPU can literally go all the way to 4 gigahertz, but he was running it gimped by, I don't know how many percent, but it's a very significant one. But long story made short, here we can in general see that there is going to be a lot of cores and threads that Windows 10 just, it doesn't understand this game. And so it's switching its focus depending on the CPU cores, which basically is chunks of the brain of your PC. You would rather it to be stable than to scramble about, but Windows 10 is scrambling right now. Bad for the performance. You can see that by the general numbers of the frame rate. And at sometimes, it even goes up as far as 20% more performance in Windows 7 than 10. And I don't like that at all. And I think that they should maybe look into that. Because after all, your GPU and CPU work together in order to get you the best frame rate. And this here is not good results whatsoever. Despite all of those caveats and bullshit that this rather uneducated benchmarker did though, one thing is for sure, and that is that if you tune it properly, it's going to perform really good in CSGO. And that is something that I really enjoy. So now let's move over to the visualization of frame rate and how it does itself in games. I'm not going to spend too much time on this sort of stuff because I literally have like 30-40 tabs. Just I could use all of them, but I'm just going to cherry pick a bit. Now, in general, it's it's a very fair conclusion. If you want to get an average higher frame rate and on average way more performance, you can choose some of these 4-core or 8-core or 10-core parts from Intel if you want to. However, remember that the worst slash best slash most expensive part that AMD got goes for $500, while Intel, how much do you think that they take for their parts? At best, they are selling the 7.7K here for I think like 320 or $30, but all of the other parts here, just about all of them, maybe not this one, and that one, they are going for everything from $1,000 all the way up to just about $2,000, depending on where you look. And that is fucking retarded when you take a look at the actual workload scores that you get with the 1800X. Anyways, that is more of a synthetic thing, because if you're rendering videos, that is where this part is way more valuable and performs just as good as all of these other ones. But in gaming, there's something that seriously have to be resolved with this CPU, and because it's so new, as we saw with CSGO, it's not performing up to par, and that is very unfortunate, sadly. However, reality is reality, so let's move over then to some more fuzzy lines. Yeah, by the way, you can see here that the frame rate is still pretty stable, but I guess I should move over to a game like Doom with Vulkan, where everything works out pretty well, and this is kind of what I wanted to show. So when you are playing a game, your frame rate will never be 100% perfect. And you can see that right here with the yellow, the red, and the orange line. All the CPUs playing Doom with Vulkan are actually very, very, very stable. It only have a little bit of jitter at the 7,000 to 9,000 frame mark. And that is not just a good score, but Vulkan is also utilizing the CPU properly, and there's very few detrimental spikes that will ruin your experience. And that's aside from a lot of the smaller jitter, which might literally disappear when the CPU gets its proper calibration to an operative system. So that's going to be very cool to see. But what I wanted to show is that even when the frame rate is incredibly crisp, every frame is being delivered on point every single time, there will still be fuzziness. But I mean, if you take a look at Intel, for example, here you can see way more fuzziness, and it's at random places, and in some cases it's better and worse, but it's in general a little bit worse, and that is something where I think, like, you know what? AMD might be future-proof here in the department of raw quality by frame and compatibility. And also, you could take it as far as when you properly calibrate the cores, you'll get even more frames. I mean, here, most of the CPUs are actually bottlenecked severely by the graphics card, so they just can't do all the work they're supposed to do. But despite that, it's very curious of a type of results, and you can see here that when everything is running properly, you're basically getting the same performance with the 1800X, which is the new flagship from AMD, in the processor, the brain department of your PC, versus all the other stuff that your boy Intel is delivering. Intel and their fairly expensive stuff. However, most of the results are not this great when it comes down to AMD currently, and some of the reason for that is because it works like two CPUs in one, and this is where I figured we should go and take a look at some other fuzzy lines, because I find this to be very interesting. This is a Japanese site, but I'm gonna assume that they have with these two CPUs, it's the 7700K again, versus the Ryzen. I do believe it was. This might be just the 1700, yeah. I don't understand a single fucking word of what they're saying, but what I do know, however, is that not only are the results fairly similar, and I think this was because of how they are actually running this with a great GPU. The 1080, whether or not it's a Thai or not, the 1080 Thai, I don't know, because I don't read Japanese, but anyways, the actual results that we are seeing here, and they are being run with different results and different settings, or more specifically different games, and I'm gonna assume that they're running the same settings, because, you know, if you don't, what the hell are you doing? The results are fairly similar, and this is very cool because it proves that when you're doing shit right, you're going to get the performance that you're looking for, but if you don't, you are not gonna get the performance you're looking for, and that is obviously something that has to be figured out, but it does promise a lot of good from the lineup of AMD. Now here though, this is what I found to be the most curious. The 1700 is the CPU AMD is delivering and providing that is the most jittery, but even then, even the worst new flagship from AMD is actually better versus the 7.7K here when it comes down to general jitter. Yes, both the CPUs have very much jitter, but you can see here the crispest, most crazy lines very early on here. Head-to-head with Intel, it's inferior, and this might potentially explain a lot of the stuff people talk about when they're playing with Intel parts. They're playing Grand Theft Auto, for example, and they're talking about whatever game it might be, in which, you know, here in Battlefield it's 180, but in most games they have a benchmark. They say that you're getting a completely crisp experience with AMD. Like, when you're taking a look at, and when you're trying to get the most crisp frame rate, so that, for example, your hand-to-eye coordination is going to be the most scalable, it's going to be perfect, there won't be a single bug, a single issue at all, that is where you might want to get either the part that is the most ready or the most future-proof. And currently, based upon just rawly looking at the data right here, I'm looking at potential from the 1700. However, when everything is calibrated with Vulkan, for example, it seemed to be fairly even, and I think that you're basically getting just about the same, unless you can get proper results by having an even better graphics card, for example, or is simulating so that you can see whether or not the GPU or CPU is going to perform so and so well. But anyways, long story made short, there, like, if you take a look at the smaller gaps here, you take a look at the general jitter from the CPUs right here, this could, you know, be better than what it is, but yeah, like, you just gotta take a look and judge for yourself, I guess. And Dark Souls, I don't know how they're testing it right here. But the 1700, this one really have some serious problems. So I would wonder what is gonna happen if they were to, for example, run the 1700X or the 1800X. Despite that, though, when everything here is running properly, when the game is figuring out which cores to go to and whatnot properly, everything looks just about as crisp as the other one. And here, to be frank, the lines are so tiny, I don't even know, it can't even make any difference of them. While here, for example, there's some great, insane stutters between only the 1700, and I'm fairly sure that all of those will be gone, and then suddenly you're looking at very similar results that are looking very curious indeed. However, there's obviously going to be downsides to have a CPU that is kind of split in half in the middle, because that is how the design works. Holy shit, The Witcher was just bad for both CPUs, but man, I'm really wondering what is causing all of these spikes, and I'm wondering if it's going to be more cool when it's removed. But let's talk about the internal design, because when that is getting resolved, this curve is going to basically turn into this one, and that is something people have to kind of learn, I guess, because many people expect the new AMD CPUs to just be a CPU, but then when the results aren't as good, they're like, okay, so it's not as good. But that is actually kind of not reality, because it have a lot more performance. So here, basically, you're looking at the average frames and where they land at and how good they are, and you can see here that you're getting a more reliable result regarding the frame rate from Ryzen in Grand Theft Auto. However, you're still getting a decent chunk of bad frames in general, if I'm reading this graph right. What is, however, very interesting is that there are two spikes here, and the reason I'm gonna claim this will be because whenever they... how does it work again? So you have 8 CPUs inside of one giant CPU. That's basically all the new CPUs nowadays, coming from Ryzen and whatnot. While here, there's only 4 CPUs, all in one chunk. Here, there's like 2 of those. That means that they have to communicate in a slow fashion between each other, because that is going to be a little bit more efficient, but it's still not as good. And that means, though, that when the game doesn't know what the fuck it's doing, and it's suddenly randomly switching its focus with some tasks, maybe it's going to load in a little bit of houses here, some cars there, maybe it's going to run some AI for a random dude walking around down the street over there. When it takes the focus from the right portion of all the CPUs to the left one, suddenly there's a fuck ton of delay, and that means that it has to cross-talk between the chunks of the cores, which, while it can do it reliably, uncalibrated, this is the result you get. This looks absolutely crazy, and I'm gonna assume that this will also create a lot of delay regarding every frame that you're seeing, and that showcases as these blue spikes right here with the Ryzen 1700. But remove them, and the results are really, really similar for both CPUs in all of these tests right here, and that is, again, what I'm saying. Like, it's very curious how the results can be so matching, despite all the jitter coming from both CPUs, in which... preferably, hopefully, the results are gonna be a lot better from Ryzen, and that's aside from more core compatibility and thread compatibility, because you are, after all, dealing with 8 cores and 16 threads, which is a huge amount of resources. But anyways, that is its own little subject that hopefully will get fixed eventually. Let's now take a look at some tests here, and this is a dude that just simulated Ryzen with 4 cores and 8 threads at 4 GHz, which is overclocked with Ryzen, against the 7700K, which is overclocked to 5 GHz as well. And here you can see that while a multi-core performance for AMD is a little bit better, its single-core performance in this simulated environment is a little bit worse. However, in most game case scenarios, you actually get more performance in this 4-core, 8-thread environment, in which you're basically only using half of the CPU, half of the 1800X, you can see right here, versus what you're getting with the 7700K. However, these results aren't necessarily as accurate, though, and the reason for this, ladies and gents, is because you can overclock the 7700K all the way up to 5 GHz if you have an expensive motherboard and reasonable cooling and a little bit of time to tweak it. People are experiencing still issues with both platforms. I'll be honest with you guys and say that, but yeah, these results speak for themselves. You can take a look here, and Tom Clancy's The Division is actually just about the same, so that might be a GPU bottleneck issue, so that you don't get to see truly how far both can push each other. However, the trend in all of these tests regarding the average, the minimum, and the maximum frame rate is all going in favor of Ryzen, and that just really proves that you have a lot of compatibility potential if you do it properly, because these are all frame rates with half of the effective cluster of the Ryzen CPU right here. If you can just make it so that the game understands what the fuck it's supposed to do, I think that you could get close to double, and that is going to be very, very good. Now let's move over to some historical science right here. Let me just double check. Yeah, everything is working as it should. So this right here, you're taking a look at a 480p/720p test gaming benchmark from computerbase.de, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken. Now they are taking the classic 2500K Intel chip versus the FX 8350, the exact one I have. I've had mine almost as long as this one. I think I bought mine like very early 2013. Anyways, the stats right here is showing a clear early lead for Intel, and this is because it's in general more compatible with games. And games are also more interested in a more popular CPU, so they're all going to be catered towards the CPU, which in general have less threads and less cores, versus not Ryzen, Bulldozer here, which had 8 cores and 8 threads in general, even though it had only 4 FPUs. That did make it weaker versus a proper 8-core CPU. Excuse me, but despite that though, you can see here that the performance is almost every single time, except for between 2013 and 2014, going in the favor, and is actually making it so that AMD here is getting a lot of that lead back when you all go all the way, when you go all the way to Titan, Pascal, GTX Titan in 2017, and the lead is actually pretty severe when you get to that type of terrain. The clear reason for this is because you are getting 8 actual cores, not the best types, not the most modern ones, but you're actually getting more future-proofing in buying more cores as well. So if you guys are looking at long-time stable gaming in general, and you don't care about insane graphical performance, or even if you do, you will not shoot yourself as hard in the foot by going for AMD and multi-core stuff than what you think you are doing, just because of how in the future, more programs are going to take utilization of more CPU cores and whatnot. The reason for that is because it is a lot more efficient to design CPUs like that. Consoles normally get more CPU cores anyways, so that they can take some of the same benefits. And that's aside from people just branching out instead when they are designing a game. So instead of, for example, having a couple few tasks being run on a couple of few very, very fast CPU cores, it's just spreading out instead and then synchronizing everything up. And that is where also I don't honestly think that there's going to be games that are going to perform and going to be designed to perform that much higher than 300 FPS. It just doesn't really seem to be feasible and sensible, even though it eventually might become a thing. Who knows? Despite that though, if you pay a ton of money, you will obviously naturally get to that performance point. Now I think that we should take a look at some synthetic benchmarks so that we can see the true actual theoretical performance in these CPUs. And here we can see, and by the way, this is primarily actually a benchmark of the GTX 1080 Ti, so that's basically the best CPU you can potentially possibly get in this day and age. And eTechnics.com here was nice enough to test this GPU with an AMD and Intel CPU. And as we can see here, the 1080 7700K is just about beating it, I do believe, here in the graphics and score. This is Firestrike 1080p in general. Now keep in mind that these actual tests are incredibly taxing, and the stats in general does not lie. You're seeing a decent little bump here in the score in general with an overclocked Ryzen with a Ti, but aside from that, that might mainly be in the physics department. Aside from that, the end result is very similar with the overclock, while this one is running stock. So obviously there is more potential in the 7700K, but that is primarily because it's just designed that way, and that's aside from all of the other things in which makes Ryzen superior regarding workloads. But anyways, that is how it is. You can't really do anything about that unless developers truly branch out, which is, you know, their job really. Here in the Firestrike at 2K, results are getting way more linear and similar, and I find this to be very cool because the overclocked Ryzen here, literally it doesn't go any further. Yeah, the results are now suddenly all very, very similar, so that's kind of cool to see. And at 4K, we have the same result. So that literally means that if you want to be future-proof, this stuff works. It's doing the trick. It's doing the job, especially at the higher resolutions. And I also want to point out that the actual true end difference right here, relatively speaking, is really fucking tiny, and you're most likely getting a metric ton of value for your money if it's something that you're looking for, to have a PC that can render out videos very fast and all that lovely jazz. Now with Time Spy, which is incredibly new and very much so potentially, like, I'm gonna theorize, I don't know, but maybe like it's utilizing more cores and whatnot. Here it's performing even better, and even better so just about with overclocking. So that's kind of cool to see that when you're running the absolute most cutting edge moderate benchmark, suddenly it's better. So that's food for thought. Maybe it's more future proof than what you would think, right? At least that is something I would imagine. Now, I also want to point out that in this benchmark, if you look at almost all the games, you will in general see that Ryzen is neck and neck, and in some cases beating, and in some cases giving you better lower frames in a gaming environment where you are running the GTX 1080 Ti. So that's something to seriously consider in the longer run. It looks like the CPU legitimately is like very future-proof. But then again, as I've stated many times, it really depends on the people that are doing the dankest compatibility work in general. Now, this is from Linus Tech Tips. He did a 4K and 2K and 1K test, I think it was, with the Ti, with the 1800X and the 7.7K here in GTA 5. And you can see here, especially at 4K, and I'll honestly, like, even if you're I guess you would say an overkill enthusiast, this stuff here really makes a difference. If you're gonna play at 4K, you like to play GTA 5, see the minimum frame rate right here. This was the worst average lowest frame rate that they were able to get. So you are getting way more quality because you're never dipping as far down regarding the frame rate versus what you get with the 1080 Ti on the 7.7K here. And I'm personally going to say that that might just be because you're pushing this CPU all the way to the brink. 4 cores, 8 threads, it can't branch out, and it's already overclocked to high hell, and the entire focus is just being barraged on this little unit, or rather old and super pressured unit, and it doesn't look like it's really dealing with the pressure as well as you would think. However, I'm just speaking out of my ass here. I really want to see more tests in this avenue, because, I mean, take a look here. 980 Ti, 14.2. 980 Ti here, 22. Yeah, that's cool. I think that's the only victory, because when you then take a look at the Titan XP here, yeah, there we got 29. Here, Titan XP, 20. So, like, what the fuck is going on? 1080 right here, 17.5. 1080 here, 19.6. So, it's always a little bit better. Fury X, 22.4. Fury X here, 20. So, you're actually looking at less quality regarding your general frame rate, the average of the lower frames, at least, with Intel versus AMD. So, just food for thought there, food for thought. Very curious and cool stuff to see. Now let's move over to some of the more niche stuff, and this is directly connected to how much performance you're getting out of your CPU, Ryzen CPU. So apparently, people did a lot of benchmark tests, and you can get up to like 45–46% extra write and read speed with your RAM if you overclock your Ryzen CPU properly. And that increase is fucking insane if you're gonna do anything regarding loading up big games, loading anything really, if you're gonna render and whatnot. And to me, that is gonna be so useful. I'm gonna be able to shit out videos in 2K 60 FPS like it was nothing if I want to. So I'm obviously gonna upscale some of my 1080p content because it looks better that way. It is how it is. But what is the most cool thing is that in this benchmark from legitreviews.com, they found out that you actually get some actual real world benefits, I guess, if you're overclocking your RAM. Now, they only saw an improvement in Firestrike 3D Mark Firestrike by 2.3% regarding the actual end score. That could be in the physics department or the frame rate department. I'm gonna say maybe it's both. However, you can see that the physics score went up by 5% basically. So, like, you actually see a tangible improvement there. However, this is not even one of the games in which it's, benchmark, 3D benchmarks, in which it's hitting out well with. Here you can also see that if you're rendering, getting a little bit better RAM, it's going to shave off 3.4% of the first pass and 0.6% of the second pass. So that's also pretty good rendering videos. But yeah, here with the Deus Ex Mankind Divided and 7th SIP, you can see the most insane improvements. So the dude here at 1080p literally went up like 16% regarding his frame rate. That's 16% benefit, 16% more frames just by going from a 2133 megahertz RAM all the way up to 3200. Yes, you're barely seeing any improvement at all when you are going at, for example, 2K performance, but it's still going to be super useful if you're going to play a high frame rate game running at a lower resolution at a higher refresh rate screen. And that is CSGO in a nutshell for you, ladies and gentlemen. So it's very cool to see that this is reality. For 7-zip, I really don't give a shit. You're barely getting any extra performance. A little bit, 3.3%, but it's still an improvement nonetheless. Now, there's way more benchmarks here you can look at, so take a look at that if you want to. That is basically it. I think we should then go all the way back here to the start. Regarding your general quality and frame rate you're looking at. You can see here, frame rate versus frame time. Ryzen is most likely married with a really good graphics card, or a very good graphics card, or a reasonable graphics card. Maybe something new AMD is going to release, because they have a lot of stuff up their sleeve apparently. You're most likely going to get a lot of performance that you can drive straight into the bank. And as Source 2 gets further developed and is slowly implemented into CSGO, for example, eventually we'll see even more core utilization, and it will maybe be put together properly. And that's aside from the XFR, or whatever the fuck it's called, that Ryzen have, which I guess you could say accuracy overclocks 2 cores. And most of us know by now that CSGO is one of those games where it will put a lot of load on one thread, on one core, and then it takes a little bit more focus, but not as much on the next core, and then it's less and less and less the further into you get regarding the cores. And while that is incredibly inefficient, with this exact function that Ryzen have, it's going to be surprisingly useful. And it's a feature that literally doesn't exist with Intel yet either. So yeah, basically, just to make this video that is already long shorter, to summarize this video, now you'll most likely learn a lot about frame rate, what you want to get to in general, and all that sort of stuff regarding the theoretics behind it. Now, I'm in the future most likely going to do some tests, finding out exactly what gives you what frame rate, and I'm going to do when, or if I can ever get my hands on some Ryzen stuff in Norway, I'm going to do some benchmarks myself. I'm going to calibrate the game properly like a professional, because I know all my shit, okay? Just like it's fucking silly to take a look at all these other silly benchmarks and see that they're fucking up stuff and whatnot. But I mean, they're not as fucking head buried down into CS as I am. Got over 5k hours in the game and just all that sort of silly, funny experience and whatnot. But anyways, so yeah, like a lot of stuff to learn, and hopefully Microsoft, the motherboard manufacturers, are going to get their shit together and fix the BIOS and stability and RAM compatibility and all that. And hopefully Valve is going to branch out and not only support, I think they support up to like 6 threads or something, 4 or 6 or maybe 8 threads. Hopefully they're going to go further, but that's up to them. They don't have to either, because at one point in time, it just doesn't really give you anymore. You might instead go for a better graphics card. And that's aside from me, most likely in the longer run, randomly putting together a comprehensive guide of what you might want to upgrade when you want to get the best performance in CSGO. Despite that, though, if you are even going to aim for anything, I would still recommend you to wait. Vega from AMD is coming out. That is going to make Intel and AMD shuffle around prices, and they might have something that is going to be reasonable and really good for CSGO. Then you have the R5 lineup from AMD that is going to be released, which will make Intel shuffle their prices around even more. And it will force them to release something newer, deeper into the future, maybe 1 or 2 years into the future. For all we know, they already have some stuff out there that is good, so maybe they will just cut the prices hardcore. They haven't officially cut prices yet, by the way, so you still have to wait anyways. So yeah, basically, there's a lot of good stuff coming in the world of electronics, the world of computers and all that sort of stuff. And I can't wait to get my old workhorse PC that have thus far rendered out more than 1,000 videos, test renders and whatnot. I can't wait to get it upgraded and retired and make that CPU put into the stream PC so that it's a little bit better and so that everything is being utilized properly and whatnot. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and if you have any comments or of whatever it might be, comment below and I'll read it and reply eventually. If you want to support me in any way, shape or form, I would recommend you to become a Patreon. There are tons of brand new things, perks that you get if you decide to support the channel, so do that if you want to. Yeah, have a nice day, and don't get beastified when you play.